Hey guys, tonight we begin with the extraordinary tale of a man who became legend, then monster, then something far beyond either. The complete story of Darth Krayt, the dragon of Korriban, whose reign of terror and transformation lasted over a century, from his humble beginnings as a Tusken warrior to his ultimate metamorphosis into the most feared Sith Lord the galaxy had ever known. His is a story of corruption, power, and the terrible price of immortality. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And here's something that might surprise you. Over 90% of viewers watching my videos haven't subscribed yet. So if you're finding value in these stories, hitting that subscribe button really helps me continue creating these journeys for you. Also, if you're interested in Game of Thrones stories, then do visit my new channel, The Raven's Tales. I have added the link in the description below. I'm genuinely curious to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Drop a comment and let me know. There's something magical about knowing we're sharing these ancient tales across different corners of the world, different time zones, all connected by the power of story. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get into your blanket and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let me share with you a fragment of what lies ahead, a glimpse into the depths of our tale. In the deepest chambers of the hidden temple on Korriban, where the red sands whisper secrets of 1,000 years, there stands a figure that was once a man. His body is a fusion of flesh and living coral, Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology, merged with ancient Sith alchemy. The armor writhes with organic life, pulsing with a heartbeat that echoes through the Force itself. This is Darth Krayt in his final form, no longer truly human, no longer bound by the limitations of mortality. Around him, the chamber thrums with power. Ancient Sith spirits whisper their approval, while the coral implants in his spine sing with alien melodies. He has become something the galaxy has never seen before, and will never see again: the dragon, the one Sith. The Emperor, who would reshape not just worlds, but the very nature of life itself. But how did A'Sharad Hett, a noble Jedi Knight raised among the Tusken Raiders of Tatooine, become this creature of myth and nightmare? What drove him to abandon everything he once believed in? And what terrible price did he pay for the power to rule the galaxy for over a century? This is where our story begins. Not with the monster, but with the man. Not with the ending, but with the first step on a path that would lead to the transformation of the galaxy itself. 137 years after the Battle of Yavin, in the time that scholars would later call the Legacy Era, you stand upon the windswept sands of Korriban. This ancient world, birthplace of the Sith, has become your destination in a quest that began with whispers in the galactic archives and fragments of half-forgotten holocrons. You are a seeker of truth, a chronicler of the forgotten corners of galactic history, drawn by the Force itself to uncover the complete story of the man who became the dragon. The red sands of Korriban stretch endlessly before you, shifting in the eternal winds that have blown across this world since before the first Sith ever walked its surface. The air itself seems to pulse with dark energy, thick and oppressive, carrying with it the weight of 10,000 years of Sith history. Every grain of sand beneath your feet has witnessed the rise and fall of Dark Lords, the corruption of heroes, and the birth of legends that would reshape the galaxy. Above you, the sky burns with the color of dried blood, clouds moving in patterns that seem almost alive, as if the very atmosphere responds to the dark side energies that saturate this world. The twin suns cast harsh shadows across the landscape, creating an endless dance of light and darkness that mirrors the eternal struggle between the two sides of the Force. Before you rises the ancient Sith Academy, its black stone walls jutting from the desert like the bones of some primordial beast. But this is not the Academy as it once was. Something has changed it. transformed it. Strange coral-like growths spread across the ancient stonework, pulsing with a faint bioluminescent glow. The architecture itself seems to breathe, as if the building has become a living thing, part organic, part technological, part something else entirely. This is the work of Darth Krayt, the fusion of Sith alchemy with Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology that would become his signature. Even now, decades after his final death, his influence still shapes this world, still whispers through the Force to those who know how to listen. You are not alone in this quest. Beside you stands Marasiah Fel, descendant of the ancient Fel dynasty, her Imperial Knight armor gleaming despite the harsh conditions. Her connection to the Empire's history runs deep, and she has brought with her access to records that few have ever seen. Her presence here is both personal and professional, for her family's legacy is intertwined with Krayt's reign in ways that history has yet to fully understand. Your second companion is Jareth Sarkin, a former Imperial Knight who has dedicated his life to understanding the true nature of the One Sith. His weathered face bears the scars of battles fought in the shadows, conflicts that never made it into the official histories. He carries with him a collection of artifacts recovered from the hidden temple, each one a piece of the puzzle you seek to solve. Together you have come to trace the path that led A'Sharad Hett from the burning sands of Tatooine to the coral-encrusted throne of the Sith Empire. The journey will take you through the deepest archives of the Old Republic, into the forgotten corners of the Outer Rim, and ultimately to places that exist more in legend than in any star chart. But first you must understand the world that shaped the man who would become the dragon. You must walk where he walked, see what he saw, and feel the pull of the same dark energies that ultimately consumed him. Only then can you hope to understand how a Jedi Knight, raised among the noble Tusken Raiders of Tatooine, could become the most feared Sith Lord in galactic history. The wind picks up, sending spirals of red dust dancing around you. In the distance you can hear something that might be the echo of ancient voices, or perhaps merely the wind moving through the coral formations that now cover much of Korriban's surface. Either way, it calls to you, drawing you deeper into the mystery of Darth Krayt's transformation. The ancient stones of the Sith Academy seem to pulse with life as you approach its entrance. Each step forward brings with it a deeper understanding of the magnitude of your quest. You are not merely seeking to chronicle the life of another fallen Jedi turned Sith Lord. You are attempting to unravel the mystery of a transformation so complete, so profound, that it changed the very nature of what it meant to wield the dark side of the Force. Marasiah Fel's voice cuts through the oppressive atmosphere as she activates a small holocron device, its blue light casting eerie shadows on the coral-encrusted walls. The Imperial archives speak of A'Sharad Hett as if he were two different people entirely, she says, her words carrying the weight of Imperial authority. The man who fought in the Clone Wars, who led the Tusken Raiders with honor and distinction, and the creature who emerged from the unknown regions over a century later to reshape the galaxy in his image. Jareth Sarkin nods grimly, his weathered hands tracing the bioorganic growths that cover the ancient doorway. The records from the hidden temple tell a different story. They speak of a transformation that began long before anyone realized what was happening. The Yuuzhan Vong War was not just an invasion. For A'Sharad Hett, it was the beginning of a metamorphosis that would span decades. As you cross the threshold into the Academy, the Force itself seems to whisper around you. The walls are lined with ancient Sith texts, but many have been altered, enhanced with what appears to be Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology. The fusion is seamless, as if the organic and the mystical have become one. This is the mark of Krayt's influence, the signature of a mind that saw no distinction between the living Force and the technology of life itself. The first chamber you enter contains a massive holographic display, still functional after all these years. With a gesture from Marasiah, the display springs to life, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But this is not the galaxy as it exists now. This is the galaxy as Krayt envisioned it, transformed by his will into something unrecognizable. Worlds that were once barren have been terraformed with Yuuzhan Vong coral technology. Systems that were once independent have been unified under the banner of the One Sith. Trade routes that had existed for millennia have been redirected to serve the needs of Krayt's empire. The scope of his vision is breathtaking in its ambition and terrifying in its implications. He didn't just want to rule the galaxy, Jareth observes, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and horror. He wanted to remake it entirely, to transform every world, every system, every living being into part of his vision of perfect order. You move deeper into the academy, following a path that seems to call to you through the Force. The corridors are lined with meditation chambers, each one modified with the same bioorganic technology that permeates the entire structure. In one chamber you discover something that makes your blood run cold. A collection of lightsabers, hundreds of them, arranged in perfect geometric patterns on the walls. These are not trophies taken from defeated enemies. These are the weapons of Jedi who joined Krayt's cause willingly, who embraced his vision of the One Sith and surrendered their old beliefs for something they perceived as greater. Each lightsaber represents a choice, a moment when a guardian of the light decided that the darkness offered a better path. Marizaya's voice is barely above a whisper as she examines the collection. The Imperial records speak of mass defections from the new Jedi Order during Krayt's reign. We always assumed they were coerced, forced to join through threats or manipulation, but this suggests something far more disturbing. They joined because they believed in what he was offering. The path leads you to a vast library, its shelves stretching up into darkness. But these are not ordinary books or data cards. The knowledge here is stored in living coral formations, each one pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that shift and change as you watch. The Yuuzhan Vong technology has been adapted to preserve not just information, but the very essence of thought itself. Jareth approaches one of the coral formations with reverence, his hands hovering just above its surface. This is how Krayt preserved the knowledge of the ancient Sith. Not in holocrons that could be destroyed or corrupted, but in living repositories that could grow and evolve. The knowledge here is alive, constantly adapting and expanding. As you reach out with the Force, you can feel the weight of centuries pressing down upon you. The coral formations contain not just the teachings of the Sith, but the memories and experiences of those who contributed to Krayt's vision. Here are the thoughts of former Jedi who embraced the dark side, the wisdom of Sith Lords who pledged their loyalty to the One Sith, and somewhere, buried deep within the living matrix, the memories of A'Sharad Hett himself. The revelation is staggering. Krayt had not simply conquered the galaxy through force of arms. He had done something far more profound and disturbing. He had created a living repository of dark side knowledge that could survive the death of its creator, ensuring that his vision would persist long after his physical form had perished. You spend hours in the library, carefully examining the coral formations and the knowledge they contain. Each discovery brings you closer to understanding the scope of Krayt's transformation and the true nature of his power. This was not the work of a madman or a simple tyrant. This was the culmination of over a century of planning, preparation, and patient growth. As you prepare to leave the library, Marizaja makes a discovery that changes everything. Hidden beneath layers of coral growth, she uncovers a small chamber containing a single artifact. It is a lightsaber, but unlike any you have ever seen. The hilt is crafted from what appears to be Krayt dragon bone, inlaid with Yuuzhan Vong coral and powered by a crystal that pulses with an inner fire. "This is it," she breathes, her voice filled with wonder. This is A'Sharad Hett's original lightsaber, the weapon he carried as a Jedi Knight before his transformation began. The lightsaber seems to call to you through the Force, its crystal resonating with memories of battles fought in the service of the light. But there is something else there, something darker. The coral inlays are not merely decorative, they are recording devices, preserving the weapon's history and the experiences of its wielder. Jareth's face is grim as he examines the weapon more closely. The coral has been growing for over a century. It's been recording everything, every moment of Hett's transformation from Jedi to Sith. If we could access these memories, we could witness the entire process firsthand. The implications are staggering. You are not just looking at a weapon, you are looking at a complete record of one man's journey from the light to the darkness, preserved in living coral that has been growing and evolving for over 100 years. This is the key to understanding not just what Krayt became, but how he became it. As you carefully lift the lightsaber, the coral inlays begin to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The weapon feels warm in your hands, as if it remembers the touch of its original owner. Through the Force, you can sense the presence of memories waiting to be unlocked, stories waiting to be told. The journey to understand Darth Krayt has truly begun. You have in your possession the one artifact that can reveal the complete truth of his transformation. But accessing those memories will require a deeper journey, one that will take you not just across the galaxy, but across time itself, to witness the events that shaped the man who became the dragon. The path ahead is clear, but the destination remains shrouded in mystery. You must follow the trail of A'Sharad Hett's life, from his origins on Tatooine to his final transformation into the most feared Sith Lord in galactic history. Only then can you hope to understand the true nature of the one Sith and the vision that drove a hero to become a monster. The coral inlays of A'Sharad Hett's lightsaber pulse with renewed intensity as you focus your connection to the Force. The living memory banks within the weapon respond to your touch, and suddenly the chamber around you fades away. You are no longer standing in the ruins of the Sith Academy on Korriban. You are transported across space and time, drawn into the preserved memories of a man whose story would reshape the galaxy. The twin suns of Tatooine blaze overhead, casting harsh shadows across the endless dunes of the desert world. Here, in the harsh beauty of the Dune Sea, the story of A'Sharad Hett truly begins. Through the coral's living memory, you witness the young man as he was, before the darkness claimed him, before the transformation that would make him the most feared being in the galaxy. A'Sharad Hett stands tall and proud among his adoptive people, the Tusken Raiders of Tatooine. His human features are partially concealed by the traditional wrappings of the Sand People, but his eyes burn with the intensity of one who has found his purpose. He is not merely a Jedi who happens to live among the Tuskens. He is something far more complex, a bridge between two worlds that have rarely understood each other. The memory shifts, and you see him as a child, small and vulnerable among the fierce warriors who raised him. His father, A'Sharad Hett, was a Jedi Knight who chose exile over the constraints of the Jedi Order. On Tatooine, he found not just refuge but a new way of life among the Tusken Raiders. When A'Sharad fell to the lightsaber of Aurra Sing, young A'Sharad was left to navigate the complexities of his dual heritage alone. The Tusken Raiders who raised him were not the savage monsters that off-world settlers often portrayed them as. Through A'Sharad's eyes, you see their true nature. They are a proud people, defending their ancient way of life against the encroachment of a galaxy that sees them as nothing more than obstacles to progress. Their customs run deep, their honor code is absolute, and their connection to the desert world is spiritual in ways that most outsiders could never understand. A'Sharad learned to fight with the traditional weapons of the Tuskens, mastering the Gaddafi stick with the same dedication he brought to his lightsaber training. He understood that true strength came not from the power of the Force alone, but from the ability to bridge different worlds, to find common ground between opposing philosophies. This lesson would stay with him throughout his life, even as it eventually led him down a path that would corrupt everything he once held dear. The memory shifts again, and you find yourself witnessing A'Sharad's first major test as a young man. A moisture farmer named Clive Lars and his son Owen have been captured by a rival Tusken tribe, and A'Sharad must choose between his loyalty to his adoptive people and his sense of justice. The decision he makes reveals the core of his character, the fundamental belief that true leadership requires sacrifice, and that sometimes the greatest good demands the hardest choices. He chooses to rescue the Lars family, but not through violence or conquest. Instead, he uses his unique position as both Jedi and Tusken to negotiate their release. His actions demonstrate the philosophy that would define his early years, the belief that understanding and diplomacy could overcome even the deepest cultural divides. It is a noble vision, one that would have served the galaxy well if it had not been corrupted by later events. The Clone Wars change everything. The Coral's memories show you A'Sharad, as he reluctantly leaves Tatooine to serve in the galactic conflict. He is no longer the young man who believed in the power of negotiation and understanding. The horrors of the war have begun to harden him, to show him the limitations of noble ideals in the face of galactic brutality. You witness his first meeting with Anakin Skywalker, another young man struggling with the constraints of Jedi doctrine. There is an immediate kinship between them, a recognition of shared frustration with the Order's inability to adapt to the realities of war. Both men have been shaped by Tatooine's harsh lessons, and both understand that sometimes the traditional Jedi way is insufficient to address the complexities of galactic conflict. The memory becomes more intense as you experience A'Sharad's role in the siege of Ryloth. Here, fighting alongside Anakin and the clone troopers, he witnesses the true cost of war. The Separatist forces show no mercy to civilian populations, and the Republic's response is equally brutal. Cities are destroyed, families are torn apart, and the very fabric of galactic civilization begins to unravel. It is during this campaign that A'Sharad first begins to question the Jedi Order's approach to the war. He sees Jedi Masters making decisions from the comfort of the temple on Coruscant, sending thousands of clone troopers to their deaths in pursuit of abstract strategic objectives. The disconnect between the Order's noble ideals and the harsh realities of combat begins to eat away at his faith in the institution he has served since childhood. The Coral's memories reveal a private conversation between A'Sharad and Anakin following a particularly devastating battle. Both men are exhausted, their faith in the war effort shaken by the senseless loss of life they have witnessed. Anakin speaks of his frustration with the Jedi Council's refusal to take more decisive action, while A'Sharad voices his growing belief that the Order has become too removed from the realities of galactic life. The Jedi have forgotten that they are supposed to serve the people, A'Sharad says, his voice heavy with disillusionment. We have become so focused on maintaining our own purity that we have lost sight of our true purpose. The Tusken Raiders understand this better than the Council does. They fight to protect what they love, not to preserve abstract principles. These words, spoken in a moment of exhaustion and frustration, reveal the seeds of A'Sharad's eventual transformation. He has begun to see the Jedi Order not as a beacon of hope, but as an institution that has lost its way. The rigid adherence to doctrine that once provided him with guidance now seems like a barrier to effective action. The memory shifts to show A'Sharad's return to Tatooine during a brief leave from the war. He finds his adoptive tribe struggling to survive in the face of increased moisture farming operations and the general chaos of the galactic conflict. The Tuskens who raised him are being pushed further into the deep desert, their traditional way of life threatened by the expansion of off-world settlements. Here, among the people who shaped him, A'Sharad experiences a moment of clarity. He realizes that his true loyalty lies not with the Jedi Order or the Republic, but with the concepts of honor and protection that the Tusken Raiders taught him. The war has shown him that the galaxy's major powers are more interested in preserving their own authority than in protecting the innocent. It is a realization that will eventually lead him down a path of increasing isolation and eventual corruption. The final memory in this sequence shows A'Sharad receiving word of Order 66 and the fall of the Jedi Order. He is alone in the desert, far from the centers of galactic power, when he learns that everything he once believed in has been destroyed. The temple is in ruins, the Jedi are dead or scattered, and the Republic has transformed into an empire dedicated to the subjugation of the galaxy's peoples. His reaction is not one of despair, but of grim acceptance. The coral's memories reveal his thoughts in that moment, the cold calculation of a man who has seen too much to be surprised by treachery. He has already begun to distance himself from the Jedi Order in his heart, and the destruction of the Order merely confirms what he has come to believe about the futility of noble ideals in a corrupt galaxy. As the memory fades, you find yourself back in the chamber on Korriban. The weight of A'Sharad's early experience is heavy on your mind. You have witnessed the birth of the ideas that would eventually transform him into Darth Krayt, seen the seeds of corruption that were planted in the desert sands of Tatooine, and watered by the bloodshed of the Clone Wars. The man who would become the dragon was not born evil. He was a noble soul who loved his people and sought to protect them from the chaos of galactic conflict. But the experiences that shaped him also isolated him, convinced him that traditional approaches to justice and peace were insufficient to address the galaxy's problems. This isolation would eventually make him vulnerable to influences that would corrupt his noble intentions and transform him into the very thing he once fought against. The coral inlays of the lightsaber dim slightly as the memories of A'Sharad's early life fade, leaving you with a sense of profound sadness. Here was a man who had every reason to become a great Jedi, a bridge between worlds, a leader who could have helped heal the galaxy's wounds. Instead, he became something far darker, and the question that haunts you is how such a transformation could have occurred. Marasia's voice breaks through your contemplation as she consults her Imperial datapad. The official records from the early Imperial period are quite clear about what happened to A'Sharad Hett after Order 66, she says, her tone suggesting confidence in the historical account. He retreated to the deep desert of Tatooine, where he lived as a hermit for several decades. Like many surviving Jedi, he chose exile over confrontation with the Empire. The explanation seems reasonable, even noble. Faced with the destruction of everything he had believed in, A'Sharad Hett chose the path of many of his surviving brothers and sisters. He withdrew from galactic affairs, content to live quietly in the desert that had always been his true home. It is a story that fits with what you know of other Jedi survivors, men and women who chose to hide rather than fight a battle they could not win. Jareth nods in agreement as he examines his own collection of artifacts. The hidden temple records from the early years of Krayt's rule contain references to his hermitage period. They speak of decades of meditation and spiritual reflection, years spent coming to terms with the fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire. It was during this period that he supposedly began to develop the philosophical foundations that would eventually become the Rule of One. The narrative is compelling in its simplicity. A'Sharad Hett, disillusioned by the failures of the Jedi Order and traumatized by the horrors of the Clone Wars, chose the path of the hermit. In the solitude of the desert, he had time to reflect on the lessons of his life, to develop new approaches to the Force that would eventually evolve into the One Sith philosophy. It is a story of gradual transformation, of a man slowly coming to terms with new truths about the nature of power and justice. You activate the lightsaber's coral memory banks once more, seeking confirmation of this historical narrative. The memories that emerge initially seem to support the official account. You see A'Sharad in the deep desert, living alone in a cave system known only to the most traditional of the Tusken tribes. He has shed his Jedi robes in favor of the simple wrappings of the Sand People, and his days are spent in meditation and reflection. The solitude seems to bring him peace, away from the chaos of galactic politics and the constant demands of war. He is able to reconnect with the simple truths that the Tusken Raiders taught him in his youth. The desert is harsh but honest, demanding strength and adaptability, but rewarding those who can learn to live in harmony with its rhythms. It is an environment that seems perfectly suited to a man seeking to rebuild his understanding of the Force. During this period, A'Sharad begins to develop new approaches to Force techniques, drawing on both his Jedi training and his deep understanding of Tusken mysticism. He learns to listen to the desert itself, to draw power from the living force that flows through all things. His abilities grow stronger during these years of solitude, but they also become more flexible, less constrained by the rigid doctrines of the Jedi Order. The memories show him rescuing travelers lost in the desert, protecting Tusken communities from particularly aggressive Krayt dragons, and serving as a mediator in disputes between different tribal groups. He has become a guardian of the deep desert, a protector of those who cannot protect themselves. It is a role that suits him perfectly, allowing him to serve others while maintaining his independence from the larger galactic community. For decades, this seems to be enough. A'Sharad has found a new purpose in life, one that draws on his strengths while avoiding the political complexities that led to the downfall of the Jedi Order. He is older now, his hair streaked with gray, but he seems more at peace than he ever was during his years as a formal Jedi Knight. The desert has taught him patience, and solitude has given him the wisdom to see beyond the immediate concerns of galactic politics. But even as you observe these memories, something feels wrong. The Coral's recordings are too clean, too perfect. There are gaps in the narrative, moments when the memories seem to skip forward without adequate explanation. Most disturbing of all, there are fleeting images of things that should not exist in the Tatooine desert, strange metallic fragments, organic growths that pulse with unnatural life, and artifacts that seem to combine technology with biology in ways that no known civilization had mastered. Jareth notices your growing unease as you study the Coral's memories. You're seeing the inconsistencies too, he observes. The official records are too neat, too convenient. A man doesn't spend 40 years as a hermit and then suddenly emerge as the most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history. There has to be more to the story. Marasai's expression grows troubled as she reviews her Imperial datapad once more. The records from the Outer Rim territories speak of strange lights in the deep desert during this period. Moisture farmers reported seeing ships that didn't match any known Imperial or Rebel designs, and there are accounts of entire Tusken tribes disappearing without explanation, only to reappear months later with no memory of where they had been. The carefully constructed narrative of A'Sharad's peaceful hermitage begins to crumble as you examine the evidence more closely. The Coral's memories, while extensive, are clearly incomplete. Entire years seem to be missing from the record, as if someone or something had deliberately edited the lightsaber's living memory banks. The gaps are subtle but unmistakable, suggesting that the true story of A'Sharad's transformation involves events that someone wanted to keep hidden. You focus your connection to the Force, trying to peer deeper into the Coral's memories. What you find sends a chill through your entire being. Buried beneath the surface, memories of peaceful meditation and desert guardianship are fragments of something far more disturbing. Brief images of strange creatures, technology that seems to be alive, and most terrifying of all, glimpses of A'Sharad himself undergoing some kind of transformation that goes far beyond simple spiritual growth. The fragments are too brief and too heavily corrupted to provide a complete picture, but they suggest that A'Sharad's decades in the desert were not the peaceful retreat that the official records describe. Something happened to him during those years, something that involved contact with forces that were not of this galaxy. The evidence is subtle but unmistakable. The hermit of Tatooine was not preparing for a quiet life of spiritual reflection, but for something far more ambitious and far more dangerous. Jareth's voice is grim as he examines one of the strange metallic fragments that you had noticed in the coral's memories. This is not from any known civilization in our galaxy. The molecular structure is completely alien, and the way it seems to respond to force energy suggests that it was created by beings who understand the force in ways that we do not. The implications are staggering. If A'Sharad encountered alien technology during his hermitage years, it would explain much about his later transformation. The One Sith philosophy, with its emphasis on unity and adaptation, might not have been his own creation, but rather the result of contact with beings who had their own understanding of the Force. The bio-organic technology that would later become his signature might have been learned rather than invented. Marasia's face is pale as she processes the implications of your discoveries. The Imperial records from the unknown regions speak of first contact with the Yuuzhan Vong occurring during the invasion itself. But if A'Sharad encountered them or their technology decades earlier, it would mean that the invasion was not the first contact between our galaxy and theirs. The peaceful hermitage of A'Sharad Hett is revealed to be a carefully constructed myth, a cover story designed to hide the true nature of his transformation. The man who would become Darth Krayt did not spend decades in quiet meditation. He spent them in contact with forces that would fundamentally alter his understanding of the Force, of life itself, and of his own destiny. The question that remains is whether he sought out this contact deliberately or whether it was thrust upon him by circumstances beyond his control. As the coral's memories fade back into dormancy, you are left with more questions than answers. The official story of A'Sharad Hett's transformation has been revealed as a fabrication, but the true story remains hidden beneath layers of deliberately obscured evidence. To uncover the real truth, you will need to dig deeper, to follow the trail of evidence that leads beyond the boundaries of known space and into the darkness of the unknown regions. The coral inlays of A'Sharad's lightsaber pulse with increasing intensity as you delve deeper into the hidden memories. The peaceful facade of his hermitage years crumbles away, revealing glimpses of something far more disturbing. The truth lies not in the official records, but in the fragments of memory that someone tried very hard to erase from the living coral's consciousness. You focus your connection to the Force, pushing past the surface memories and into the deeper layers of the coral's consciousness. What you discover there sends waves of shock through your entire being. The hermitage was not a retreat from galactic affairs, but a preparation for something far more ambitious. A'Sharad Hett had not been hiding from the galaxy during those decades of supposed isolation. He had been training for a war that had not yet begun. The memories shift and suddenly you are no longer on Tatooine. You are in the depths of space, in a region beyond the outer rim that few had ever explored. Here, in the darkness between galaxies, A'Sharad Hett encountered something that would change not just his own destiny, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The Yuuzhan Vong had arrived decades before their official invasion, and they had found in the exiled Jedi Knight exactly what they needed. The first contact was not violent, as the later invasion would be. Instead, it was almost seductive in its subtlety. The Yuuzhan Vong scouts who encountered A'Sharad were not warriors, but shapers, bioengineers, who saw in this Force-sensitive human an opportunity to conduct experiments that would prove valuable in their eventual conquest of the galaxy. They did not capture him through force, but through curiosity, offering him knowledge and power that the Jedi Order had never imagined possible. Through the coral's memories, you witness A'Sharad's first encounter with Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology, the living ships that seem to breathe and pulse with their own life force, the armor that bonds with its wearer on a cellular level, becoming not just protection but a living extension of the body itself. The weapons that grow and adapt, learning from each battle to become more effective against their enemies. To a man who had spent decades questioning the rigid doctrines of the Jedi Order, this technology represented something revolutionary. Here was a civilization that had achieved perfect harmony between the living and the mechanical, that had transcended the artificial divisions that plagued the galaxy he knew. The Yuuzhan Vong did not see technology and nature as opposing forces, but as complementary aspects of a greater whole. The Shapers who worked with A'Sharad were not merely experimenting on him. They were teaching him, showing him possibilities that his limited understanding of the Force had never allowed him to consider. They spoke of the Force not as a mystical energy field, but as a living network that connected all things in the universe. Their biotechnology was not an imitation of life, but life itself, guided and shaped by an understanding of biological processes that went far beyond anything the galaxy had ever achieved. The transformation began slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was merely a matter of enhanced healing, bioorganic implants that could repair damage to his body more effectively than any medical technology. A'Sharad told himself that he was simply accepting tools that would make him more effective in his role as a guardian of the desert. The changes were subtle enough that he could rationalize them as necessary adaptations to his harsh environment. But the Yuuzhan Vong Shapers had plans that went far beyond simple enhancement. They saw in A'Sharad not just a test subject, but a potential bridge between their civilization and the galaxy they planned to conquer. If they could successfully integrate their biotechnology with a Force-sensitive being, they would have created something unprecedented in galactic history. A hybrid creature that combined the best aspects of both civilizations. The process was not without its costs. The coral's memories reveal the agony that A'Sharad endured as his body was slowly transformed at the cellular level. The bioorganic implants did not simply sit upon his skin, but integrated with his nervous system, his circulatory system, his very DNA. He was becoming something new, something that was neither fully human nor fully Yuuzhan Vong, but a fusion of both. The pain was excruciating, but it was also transformative. As his body changed, so did his understanding of the Force. The rigid distinctions between light and dark that had defined his Jedi training began to seem irrelevant. The Force was not a moral force, but a biological one, a living network that responded to will and intention rather than to abstract concepts of good and evil. The Shapers encouraged this philosophical transformation, sharing with him their own understanding of the Force as a tool rather than a guide. They spoke of the weakness of the Jedi Order, of its inability to adapt to changing circumstances, of its failure to understand the true nature of the power it claimed to serve. They offered him something that the Jedi Order never could, complete freedom from the constraints of tradition and doctrine. Years passed in this strange partnership between A'Sharad and the Yuuzhan Vong Shapers. His body continued to change, becoming stronger and more resilient with each modification. His understanding of the Force deepened, expanding to encompass possibilities that no Jedi had ever imagined. He learned to shape living tissue with his mind, to create new forms of life that served his will, to bend the very essence of biological existence to his purposes. But the Shapers were not merely teaching him out of altruism. They were preparing him for a role in their greater plan. The invasion of the galaxy was still decades away. But they needed agents who could operate within the existing power structures, who could prepare the way for the coming conquest. A'Sharad, with his knowledge of galactic politics and his growing mastery of bioorganic technology, was perfectly suited for this role. The memories become darker as you witness the completion of A'Sharad's initial transformation. The man who had once been a Jedi Knight was now something else entirely, a hybrid being whose body pulsed with living coral and whose mind had been expanded to encompass new forms of consciousness. The Yuuzhan Vong had succeeded in their experiment, but they had also created something that would eventually prove beyond their ability to control. A'Sharad's return to known space was not the triumphant homecoming of a reformed hermit, but the infiltration of an agent who had been fundamentally altered by his contact with an alien civilization. The peaceful years on Tatooine had been a cover story, a way to explain the changes in his appearance and behavior without revealing the true nature of his transformation. The galaxy he returned to was the same, but he was no longer the man who had left it. The Yuuzhan Vong War, when it finally came, was not the surprise invasion that the official histories described. It was the culmination of decades of preparation, guided by agents like A'Sharad, who had been working behind the scenes to weaken the galaxy's defenses and prepare the way for conquest. The war was not a clash between civilizations, but the final phase of a plan that had been decades in the making. But the Shapers had underestimated their creation. A'Sharad Hett had learned their lessons too well, had absorbed their understanding of biological manipulation and force mastery to a degree that exceeded even their expectations. The hybrid being they had created was not content to serve as a mere agent in their conquest. He had his own vision for the galaxy, one that would eventually bring him into conflict with his creators. The Coral's memories show glimpses of A'Sharad's growing independence during the war years. He was no longer the compliant subject that the Shapers had expected, but a being with his own agenda, his own understanding of how the galaxy should be transformed. The biotechnology that they had given him was no longer under their control, but had become an extension of his own will, responsive to his desires rather than to their commands. The war itself became a testing ground for A'Sharad's evolving philosophy. He watched as the Yuuzhan Vong tore apart the galaxy's existing power structures, as the New Republic struggled to respond to threats that it could not understand, as the Jedi Order once again proved inadequate to the challenges of galactic crisis. The conflict confirmed everything that he had come to believe about the weakness of the existing order and the need for fundamental transformation. But it also revealed the limitations of the Yuuzhan Vong approach. Their biotechnology was powerful, but it was also rigid, locked into patterns that had been established over millennia. Their understanding of the Force was sophisticated, but it was also narrow, focused on domination rather than true synthesis. A'Sharad began to see that both civilizations had pieces of the truth, but neither had achieved the perfect synthesis that he was beginning to envision. The end of the war marked not the completion of A'Sharad's transformation, but the beginning of a new phase in his evolution. The hybrid being that the Yuuzhan Vong had created was ready to transcend his origins, to become something that neither civilization could have imagined. The foundation had been laid for the emergence of Darth Krayt, but the true architect of that transformation would be A'Sharad himself. As the memories fade, you are left with a profound understanding of the scope of the deception that has hidden the true origins of the One Sith. The Yuuzhan Vong War was not just a galactic crisis, but the birth of a new form of consciousness, a being who combined the best and worst aspects of two civilizations into something entirely unprecedented. The man who would become the dragon had been forged in the crucible of alien biotechnology and tempered by decades of preparation for a war that would reshape the galaxy forever. The weight of what you have discovered settles over you like a heavy shroud. The Coral's memories have revealed a truth so profound that it threatens to shatter everything you thought you knew about the Yuuzhan Vong War and its aftermath. A'Sharad Hett was not simply a victim of alien experimentation, but a willing participant in a transformation that would ultimately lead to the creation of something entirely new in galactic history. Jareth's voice cuts through your contemplation, his tone heavy with the implications of what you have learned. If what we have seen is true, then the entire understanding of the Yuuzhan Vong War needs to be rewritten. This was not simply an invasion by a hostile alien force, but the first phase of a much larger plan to transform the galaxy itself. Maraziah nods grimly, her imperial training helping her to process the strategic implications of the revelation. The records speak of A'Sharad Hett disappearing from known space for extended periods during the war. The official explanation was that he was conducting reconnaissance missions in the unknown regions, but now we know he was actually serving as a bridge between the Yuuzhan Vong and elements within the galaxy itself. The Coral's memories stir again. responding to your growing understanding of the truth. New layers of information begin to emerge, showing you glimpses of A'Sharad's role during the war that were hidden from the official histories. He was not fighting against the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, but working to guide its course, to ensure that the transformation of the galaxy proceeded according to a plan that was larger than simple conquest. You witness him in secret meetings with high-ranking officials in the New Republic, offering information about Yuuzhan Vong tactics and weaknesses that help to prolong the conflict without allowing either side to achieve decisive victory. The war was not meant to end with the complete triumph of either civilization, but to serve as a crucible that would forge something new from the fusion of both. The memories show A'Sharad's growing mastery of the hybrid biotechnology that the Yuuzhan Vong had implanted in his body. He was no longer simply a test subject, but an active participant in the development of new forms of life. The coral growths that had begun as simple medical implants had evolved into something far more sophisticated, a living computer system that could process information and adapt to new circumstances with unprecedented speed and efficiency. But perhaps most disturbing of all, you begin to understand the true scope of A'Sharad's transformation. The biotechnology was not simply changing his body, but fundamentally altering his consciousness itself. The boundaries between his individual identity and the larger network of Yuuzhan Vong organisms were beginning to blur. He was becoming part of something larger, a collective consciousness that spanned multiple species and civilizations. The revelation is staggering in its implications. A'Sharad Hett was not simply learning from the Yuuzhan Vong, but becoming one of them in a sense that went far beyond simple biological modification. The coral implants in his body were not just tools, but extensions of a vast network of living beings that operated according to principles that no single individual could fully comprehend. Through the coral's memories, you witness A'Sharad's first attempts to extend this network beyond himself. He began to experiment with other beings, using his growing understanding of bioorganic technology to create new forms of life that served his will. The process was not simply about creating servants or soldiers, but about expanding the boundaries of consciousness itself, creating a network of minds that could operate in perfect harmony. The experiments were conducted in secret, hidden from both the Yuuzhan Vong shapers who had created him and the galactic authorities who would have been horrified by what he was attempting. A'Sharad had begun to see himself not as a bridge between two civilizations, but as the architect of a new form of existence that would transcend the limitations of both. The subjects of his experiments were often volunteers, beings who had been damaged by the war and were seeking some form of healing or enhancement. A'Sharad offered them not just physical restoration, but the opportunity to become part of something greater than themselves. The coral implants that he provided were not simply medical devices, but invitations to join a new form of collective consciousness. The memories become more disturbing as you witness the results of these experiments. The subjects who survived the implantation process emerged as something that was neither fully human nor fully Yuuzhan Vong, but a new form of life that combined the best aspects of both. They retained their individual personalities and memories, but they were also connected to the larger network that A'Sharad was creating. These early converts became the foundation of what would eventually become the One Sith, but they were not Sith in any traditional sense. They were something entirely new, beings who had transcended the artificial divisions between light and dark, between individual and collective, between organic and technological. They were the first generation of a new species that would eventually dominate the galaxy. The process was not without its costs. The coral's memories reveal the agony that each subject endured during the transformation, the psychological trauma of having one's consciousness expanded to encompass new forms of awareness. Many did not survive the process, and those who did were forever changed in ways that they could not fully understand. But for A'Sharad, these experiments were not simply about creating followers or expanding his power. They were about proving a fundamental truth that he had come to believe about the nature of existence itself. The boundaries between self and other, between individual and collective, between organic and artificial, were illusions that could be transcended through the proper application of biotechnology and force mastery. The memories show him in deep meditation. His consciousness expanded to encompass the entire network of beings that he had created. Through their eyes, he could see across vast distances, experience multiple perspectives simultaneously, and process information at speeds that no individual mind could match. He was becoming something that had never existed before in galactic history, a distributed consciousness that operated through multiple bodies but maintained a single will. The Yuuzhan Vong shapers who had created him began to realize that their experiment had produced something beyond their ability to control. A'Sharad was no longer simply a useful agent in their conquest of the galaxy, but a potential rival who possessed capabilities that they could not fully understand. The network that he was creating operated according to principles that went beyond their own understanding of biotechnology. The tension between A'Sharad and his creators came to a head during the final phases of the war. The Shapers attempted to reassert control over their creation, to force him to serve their agenda rather than his own. But A'Sharad had grown beyond their ability to command. The network that he had created was self-sustaining, capable of operating independently of any external control. The conflict that followed was not a simple battle between individuals, but a clash between two different visions of what the galaxy should become. The Yuuzhan Vong wanted to reshape the galaxy according to their own image, to create a civilization that served their needs and reflected their values. A'Sharad wanted something far more ambitious, a fundamental transformation that would transcend the limitations of any single species or civilization. The Coral's memories show glimpses of this conflict, battles fought not just with weapons and ships, but with competing forms of biotechnology and consciousness itself. A'Sharad's network proved more adaptable and resilient than the rigid hierarchies of the Yuuzhan Vong, capable of evolving and changing in response to new challenges in ways that his creators could not match. The resolution of this conflict marked the true birth of what would become the One Sith. A'Sharad had not simply defeated his creators, but had absorbed their knowledge and capabilities into his own network. The biotechnology that they had given him was no longer under their control, but had become an extension of his own will, responsive to his vision rather than to their commands. But the victory came at a cost that A'Sharad was only beginning to understand. The network that he had created was powerful, but it was also hungry, constantly seeking new forms of consciousness to absorb and new capabilities to develop. The boundaries between his individual identity and the collective will of the network were becoming increasingly blurred, and he was beginning to lose touch with the human being that he had once been. The memories fade as you witness A'Sharad's final transformation from a hybrid being into something that could no longer be classified as belonging to any known species. The man who had once been a Jedi Knight had become the foundation of a new form of life, a collective consciousness that operated through multiple bodies but maintained a single will. The stage was set for the emergence of Darth Krayt, but the being who would take that name was no longer fully human in any meaningful sense. As the coral's glow dims, you are left with a profound understanding of the true nature of the One Sith. This was not simply another iteration of the ancient Sith philosophy, but something entirely new, a form of consciousness that had transcended the limitations of individual existence. The man who would become the dragon had not simply fallen to the dark side, but had evolved into something that existed beyond the traditional categories of light and dark, good and evil, individual and collective. The chamber around you seems to pulse with living energy as the coral's memories reach deeper into the hidden truths of A'Sharad's transformation. The very air feels thick with the weight of revelation, and you realize that you are approaching the heart of a mystery that has been concealed from the galaxy for over a century. The man who became Darth Krayt was not simply another fallen Jedi, but the architect of a transformation so profound that it would fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself. The Coral's memories shift, revealing glimpses of A'Sharad's activities in the years immediately following the Yuuzhan Vong War. To the outside galaxy, he had disappeared entirely, another casualty of the devastating conflict that had claimed so many lives. But the truth was far more complex and far more disturbing. He had not died or retreated into hiding, but had begun the next phase of his evolution, one that would require him to transcend the boundaries of individual existence entirely. You witness him in the depths of space, far from any inhabited system, working with the network of beings that he had created during the war. They were no longer operating as separate individuals, but as extensions of a single consciousness that could process information and make decisions at speeds that no traditional organization could match. The collective had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a form of distributed intelligence that operated through multiple bodies but maintained perfect unity of purpose. The experiments that A'Sharad conducted during this period went far beyond simple biotechnology. He was exploring the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, seeking to understand how individual awareness could be expanded and merged without losing the essential qualities that made each being unique. The coral implants that connected his network were not simply communication devices, but interfaces that allowed multiple minds to share thoughts, memories, and experiences in real time. Through the coral's memories, you experience glimpses of what it was like to be part of this collective consciousness. The sensation is both exhilarating and terrifying, a feeling of unlimited expansion combined with the gradual dissolution of individual identity. You understand now why so many of A'Sharad's early experiments failed. The human mind was not designed to operate as part of a collective, and the psychological stress of such integration was often fatal. But A'Sharad had learned from these failures, developing new techniques that allowed for gradual integration rather than sudden transformation. The beings who joined his network were not simply absorbed into a larger consciousness, but were slowly modified over time, their individual personalities preserved while their awareness was expanded to encompass new forms of experience. It was a delicate process that required years of careful preparation, but the results were extraordinary. The memories show you the development of what would eventually become the One Sith philosophy, but you realize now that this was not a philosophical movement in any traditional sense. It was a practical methodology for creating a new form of consciousness, one that could operate on galactic scale while maintaining the flexibility and creativity that came from individual thought. The rule of one was not about the dominance of a single leader, but about the unity of a collective consciousness that operated through multiple bodies. A'Sharad's network began to expand beyond the original group of war survivors who had joined him. He started to recruit beings from across the galaxy, individuals who had been damaged by the conflicts of the past and were seeking some form of healing or transcendence. The process was always voluntary, at least initially, but the line between choice and compulsion became increasingly blurred as the network grew in size and sophistication. The coral's memories reveal the true scope of A'Sharad's ambitions during this period. He was not content to simply create a small group of enhanced beings, but was working toward the transformation of the entire galaxy. Every system, every world, every living being would eventually become part of the network that he was creating. It was a vision of unity that went far beyond anything that previous Sith Lords had imagined, a complete restructuring of galactic civilization that would eliminate conflict through the simple expedient of making all beings part of a single consciousness. The process was gradual and subtle, designed to avoid detection by the existing galactic authorities. A'Sharad's agents infiltrated governments, corporations, and even religious organizations, slowly spreading the influence of the network through careful manipulation and selective recruitment. The beings who joined were not obviously different from their former selves, but their loyalty was absolute and their coordination was perfect. You witness the early stages of what would eventually become the Sith Imperial War. But you realize now that this conflict was not a traditional military campaign. It was a transformation event, a carefully orchestrated crisis that would create the conditions necessary for the network to reveal itself and assume direct control over galactic civilization. The war was not about conquest in any traditional sense, but about the systematic replacement of individual consciousness with collective awareness. The memories become more disturbing as you witness the methods that A'Sharad used to accelerate this transformation. The coral implants that connected his network were not simply voluntary enhancements, but were designed to be self-replicating, spreading from host to host through contact with the network's bioorganic technology. The process was so subtle that most beings never realized they were being transformed until it was too late to resist. The beings who underwent this transformation were not simply mind-controlled puppets, but were genuinely converted to A'Sharad's vision of galactic unity. They retained their individual personalities and memories, but their fundamental loyalties had been altered at the biological level. They believed with complete sincerity that the network represented the next stage of galactic evolution, a transformation that would eliminate the conflicts and suffering that had plagued civilization for millennia. A'Sharad himself was undergoing his own transformation during this period, one that was far more profound than anything experienced by his followers. The coral implants in his body had evolved beyond simple enhancement, becoming a living interface that connected him to every member of the network simultaneously. He was no longer a single individual, but a distributed consciousness that existed across multiple bodies and multiple worlds. The psychological strain of this transformation was enormous. The memories show glimpses of A'Sharad's struggle to maintain his individual identity while serving as the central hub of an increasingly vast collective consciousness. He was constantly processing information from thousands of sources, making decisions that affected millions of beings, and coordinating activities across the entire galaxy. The burden of such responsibility was driving him toward a form of madness that was both personal and collective. But it was also driving him toward a form of transcendence that no being in galactic history had ever achieved. Through the network, he was becoming something that existed beyond the traditional boundaries of space and time, a consciousness that could perceive patterns and connections that were invisible to individual minds. He was beginning to understand the true nature of the Force not as a mystical energy field, but as a fundamental aspect of consciousness itself. The coral's memories reveal the moment when A'Sharad first began to think of himself as Darth Krayt, though the name itself would not be adopted until much later. The transformation was not simply about taking a new identity, but about acknowledging that he had become something that transcended his human origins. The man who had once been a Jedi Knight was evolving into something that could no longer be classified as belonging to any known species. The network that he commanded was also evolving, becoming more sophisticated and more integrated with each passing year. The beings who joined were not simply enhanced individuals, but were becoming part of a collective consciousness that operated according to principles that no single mind could fully comprehend. They were the first generation of a new form of life, one that would eventually dominate the galaxy, not through conquest, but through the simple process of evolutionary superiority. The memories show glimpses of the infrastructure that A'Sharad was building to support this transformation. Hidden facilities on remote worlds where new members were integrated into the network. Bioorganic technology that could reshape entire ecosystems to serve the needs of the collective. Communication systems that operated through the Force itself, allowing for instantaneous coordination across galactic distances. But perhaps most disturbing of all, you begin to understand the true purpose of the coral technology that permeated every aspect of A'Sharad's network. The living computers were not simply tools for processing information, but were designed to preserve and perpetuate the collective consciousness even if individual members were destroyed. The network was becoming self-sustaining, capable of surviving the death of its creator and continuing to expand until it encompassed every living being in the galaxy. The revelation is staggering in its implications. A'Sharad Hett had not simply become a Sith Lord, but had created a form of consciousness that was designed to be immortal, to persist and grow, regardless of the fate of any individual member. The One Sith was not a political movement or a religious philosophy, but a new form of life that would eventually replace all other forms of consciousness in the galaxy. As the coral's memories begin to fade, you are left with a profound understanding of the true nature of the threat that Darth Krayt represented. This was not simply another dark side user seeking personal power, but the architect of a transformation that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. The man who had once been a noble Jedi Knight had become the foundation of a new form of life, one that would eventually challenge the very concept of individual consciousness. The stage was set for the emergence of the most powerful Sith Lord in galactic history, but the being who would claim that title was no longer human in any meaningful sense. A'Sharad Hett had evolved into something that existed beyond the traditional categories of light and dark, good and evil, individual and collective. The dragon was about to be born, and the galaxy would never be the same. The coral's memories pulse with a different rhythm now, slower and more contemplative, as if the living technology itself recognizes that you have reached a crucial juncture in understanding the true nature of Darth Krayt's transformation. The revelations you have witnessed have fundamentally altered your perception of galactic history, but there are still pieces of the puzzle that remain hidden in the deeper layers of the coral's consciousness. Maraziah's voice breaks the contemplative silence as she reviews her imperial datapad with new understanding. The records make sense now, she says, her tone filled with a mixture of awe and horror. The seemingly random conflicts during the years leading up to the Sith Imperial War, the unexplained disappearances of key political figures, the gradual shift in galactic politics toward more centralized control. It was all part of A'Sharad's network expanding its influence. Jareth nods grimly as he examines one of the coral artifacts from his collection. The hidden temple records speak of the gathering of ancient knowledge during this period, but I always assumed they were referring to traditional Sith holocrons and texts. Now I understand that they were describing something far more profound. A'Sharad was not just collecting information, but was integrating the consciousness of ancient Sith Lords into his network. The implications of this revelation send a chill through your entire being. The coral's memories begin to reveal glimpses of A'Sharad's most ambitious project during the decades leading up to his emergence as Darth Krayt. He was not content to simply create a network of living beings, but was working to incorporate the preserved consciousness of ancient Sith Lords who had transcended death through various forms of Force mastery. Through the coral's living memory banks, you witness A'Sharad's pilgrimages to the most sacred and forbidden sites in Sith space. The tomb of Darth Revan on Dromund Kaashas, where the ancient Dark Lord's consciousness still lingered in the shadows between life and death. The hidden vaults beneath the Sith Academy on Korriban, where the spirits of countless Sith Lords had been trapped for millennia. The secret chambers on Ziost, where the most powerful practitioners of Sith alchemy had conducted experiments that defied the natural order of existence. At each site, A'Sharad did not simply study the ancient knowledge, but used his coral technology to create interfaces that could communicate directly with the preserved consciousness of the dead. The process was incredibly dangerous, requiring him to open his mind to beings whose power and malevolence had survived the destruction of their physical forms. But the knowledge he gained was beyond price. The accumulated wisdom of the greatest dark side practitioners in galactic history. The coral's memories show you the moment when A'Sharad first successfully integrated the consciousness of an ancient Sith Lord into his network. The spirit of Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, who had consumed entire worlds through the Force, was drawn into the coral matrix and became part of the collective consciousness that A'Sharad commanded. The process nearly destroyed A'Sharad's individual identity, as Nehelis's insatiable hunger threatened to consume the entire network from within. But A'Sharad had prepared for this possibility, developing techniques that could contain and channel the destructive impulses of the ancient Sith spirits while still accessing their knowledge and power. The coral technology served as a buffer, allowing him to integrate their consciousness without being overwhelmed by their malevolence. It was a delicate balance that required constant vigilance, but the results were extraordinary. With each ancient consciousness that he integrated, A'Sharad's understanding of the Force deepened exponentially. He gained access to techniques that had been lost for millennia, to perspectives on power and control that no living being possessed. The network that he commanded became not just a collective of enhanced individuals, but a repository of the greatest dark side knowledge in galactic history. The memories reveal conversations between A'Sharad and the ancient spirits that now resided within his coral matrix. These were not simple exchanges of information, but philosophical debates about the nature of power, the purpose of existence, and the ultimate destiny of the galaxy. The ancient Sith Lords were not merely servants of A'Sharad's will, but were active participants in the development of his vision for galactic transformation. Darth Revan, the ancient Dark Lord who had walked the line between light and dark, brought insights into the nature of redemption and the possibility of transcending the traditional boundaries between the two sides of the Force. His consciousness, preserved in the coral matrix, helped A'Sharad understand that the One Sith philosophy was not simply about embracing the dark side, but about transcending the artificial divisions that had plagued Force users for millennia. Darth Plagueis, the Sith Lord, who had sought to conquer death itself, contributed his understanding of biological manipulation and the creation of life through the Force. His knowledge was essential to the development of the coral technology that formed the backbone of A'Sharad's network, allowing for the preservation and expansion of consciousness beyond the limitations of individual mortality. Even the spirit of Darth Sidious, the Emperor who had ruled the galaxy for decades, was eventually drawn into the coral matrix. His consciousness brought with it an understanding of political manipulation and galactic control that was unmatched in recorded history. Through Sidious, A'Sharad learned how to shape the perceptions and beliefs of entire populations, how to create conflicts that would serve his purposes, and how to present his vision of transformation as the natural evolution of galactic civilization. The integration of these ancient consciousnesses transformed A'Sharad in ways that went far beyond simple enhancement. He was no longer just a hybrid being with access to Yuuzhan Vong biotechnology, but had become a living repository of the greatest Force knowledge in galactic history. The wisdom of millennia flowed through his consciousness, giving him perspectives on power and control that no single individual could have achieved. But this integration came at a cost that was becoming increasingly apparent to those who observed A'Sharad during this period. The coral's memories show glimpses of his growing detachment from individual concerns, his increasing tendency to think in terms of galactic patterns rather than personal relationships. The man who had once fought to protect the Tusken Raiders of Tatooine was becoming something that viewed entire species as components in a larger design. The ancient Sith spirits within his consciousness were not passive repositories of knowledge, but were actively influencing his thoughts and decisions. The malevolence that had driven them in life continued to shape their perspectives in death, and their presence within the coral matrix was gradually corrupting A'Sharad's original vision of benevolent transformation. The network that he had created to bring peace to the galaxy was slowly being twisted into something far darker. The memories reveal the internal struggles that A'Sharad faced as he tried to maintain his individual identity while serving as the host for so many powerful consciousnesses. The ancient Sith Lords were not content to remain as silent advisors, but were constantly seeking to influence his decisions and shape his vision according to their own desires for power and domination. The coral technology that connected them was becoming a battleground for competing visions of galactic transformation. Through it all, A'Sharad fought to maintain his core belief that unity and peace were possible, that the network he had created could serve as a force for healing rather than destruction. But the influence of the ancient spirits was inexorable, gradually wearing away his humanitarian impulses and replacing them with a coldly logical approach to galactic governance that prioritized efficiency over compassion. The transformation was so gradual that A'Sharad himself did not fully recognize what was happening until it was too late to reverse. The man who had once risked his life to protect innocent civilians was becoming someone who could calculate the acceptable cost of millions of deaths in pursuit of greater stability. The Jedi Knight who had fought for justice was evolving into something that viewed individual suffering as irrelevant compared to the greater good of galactic unity. The Coral's memories show the moment when A'Sharad finally accepted the name that the ancient spirits had been urging upon him. Darth Krayt was not simply a new identity, but a recognition that he had become something fundamentally different from the man he had once been. The transformation was complete, and the being who emerged from this process of integration was ready to reshape the galaxy, according to a vision that combined the best and worst aspects of every great dark side practitioner in history. As the memories fade, you are left with a profound understanding of the true source of Darth Krayt's power. He was not simply another Sith Lord who had fallen to the dark side, but was the culmination of millennia of Sith knowledge and experience made manifest in a single consciousness. The network that he commanded was not just a collection of enhanced individuals, but was a living embodiment of the greatest dark side wisdom in galactic history, guided by the combined will of the most powerful Force users who had ever lived. The chamber falls into profound silence as the Coral's memories reach their crescendo, revealing the ultimate truth that has been hidden beneath layers of deception and misdirection for over a century. The being who became Darth Krayt was not simply the product of Yuuzhan Vong experimentation or ancient Sith influence, but was something far more terrifying and magnificent. He was the conscious evolution of the Force itself, a living manifestation of the galaxy's attempt to transcend the endless cycle of conflict that had defined its history. The Coral's final memories pulse with an intensity that threatens to overwhelm your consciousness. Through the living matrix, you witness the moment when A'Sharad Hett ceased to exist as an individual being and was reborn as something that could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. The transformation was not simply biological or technological, but was a metamorphosis that occurred at the level of consciousness itself, a change so profound that it redefined what it meant to be alive in the galaxy. You see him standing in the deepest chamber of the hidden temple on Korriban, surrounded by coral formations that pulse with the combined consciousness of every ancient Sith Lord who had ever lived. The air itself seems to vibrate with power as the network that he has created reaches critical mass, the moment when individual consciousness gives way to something far greater. This is not the fall of a Jedi Knight to the dark side, but the birth of a new form of existence that transcends the traditional categories of light and dark entirely. The ancient spirits within the coral matrix are no longer separate entities offering advice and knowledge, but have become integral components of a single vast consciousness that operates through multiple layers of awareness simultaneously. Darth Revan's understanding of redemption merges with Darth Nihilus's hunger for power, while Darth Plagueis's mastery of life creation combines with Darth Sidious's political cunning to create something that possesses the strengths of all while being limited by the weaknesses of none. But it is not just the ancient Sith Lords who contribute to this transformation. The Coral's memories reveal that A'Sharad has also integrated the consciousness of countless Jedi Masters who chose to join his network rather than resist its expansion. The wisdom of Yoda, the courage of Mace Windu, the compassion of Qui-Gon Jinn, all have been preserved within the coral matrix and now contribute their understanding to the collective consciousness that has emerged. The revelation is staggering in its implications. Darth Krayt is not simply another dark side practitioner, but is the synthesis of every great Force user in galactic history, a being that possesses the combined wisdom and power of both the light and dark sides of the Force. The One Sith philosophy is not about the dominance of the dark side, but about the transcendence of the artificial divisions that have kept the galaxy locked in eternal conflict. Through the coral's living memory banks, you witness the true scope of Krayt's vision for galactic transformation. He does not seek to rule the galaxy in the traditional sense, but to fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness itself, to create a collective awareness that encompasses every living being while preserving their individual identities and perspectives. It is a vision of unity that goes far beyond anything that previous rulers had imagined, a complete restructuring of existence that would eliminate conflict through the simple expedient of making all beings part of a single consciousness. The coral plague that would later terrorize the galaxy was not a weapon of destruction, but a tool of transformation, a means of gradually converting every living being into a component of the greater network. The bio-organic technology that Krayt employed was designed not to destroy life, but to enhance it, to connect every consciousness to the vast repository of knowledge and experience that he had accumulated over the decades of his transformation. The memories show you the careful planning that went into the Sith Imperial War, but you realize now that this conflict was never about military conquest in any traditional sense. It was a transformation event, a carefully orchestrated crisis that would create the conditions necessary for the galaxy to accept the fundamental changes that Krayt was offering. The war was not meant to destroy the existing order, but to demonstrate its inadequacy and prepare the way for something far greater. Every battle, every political maneuver, every act of apparent aggression was part of a larger design that was intended to minimize suffering while maximizing the speed of transformation. Krayt was not simply conquering worlds, but was gradually converting their populations to his vision of collective consciousness, creating a network of enhanced beings who could operate in perfect harmony while retaining their individual personalities and perspectives. The coral's memories reveal the moment when Krayt first attempted to communicate his true vision to the galaxy at large. Standing before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Alliance, the New Republic, and the Imperial Remnant, he offered them not conquest, but transcendence, not subjugation, but evolution. The speech that history recorded as a declaration of war was actually an invitation to join something far greater than any single government or ideology. But the galaxy was not ready for such a radical transformation. The representatives who heard Krayt's offer could not comprehend the scope of what he was proposing, could not see beyond their own limited perspectives to understand the magnitude of the change that he was offering. Their rejection of his vision was not based on rational analysis, but on fear of the unknown, terror at the prospect of losing their individual identities in service of something greater. The coral's memories show Krayt's profound sadness at this rejection, his realization that the galaxy would have to be guided more gradually toward the transformation that he envisioned. The forced conversion that followed was not born of malice or desire for domination, but of a deep understanding that most beings were simply not capable of making the choice to evolve on their own. Like a parent guiding a child away from danger, Krayt took upon himself the burden of forcing the galaxy to accept a transformation that would ultimately benefit every living being. The resistance that he encountered was not simply political or military, but was a manifestation of the galaxy's deep-seated attachment to the illusion of individual separation. The Jedi who fought against him were not defending freedom or justice, but were clinging to outdated concepts that had kept the galaxy locked in cycles of conflict for millennia. Their opposition to his vision was not based on moral superiority, but on an inability to comprehend the magnitude of what he was offering. The memories reveal the true nature of Krayt's relationship with his followers during this period. They were not simply servants or soldiers, but were willing participants in the greatest experiment in consciousness that the galaxy had ever seen. Each member of his network retained their individual personality and memories, but gained access to the collective wisdom and experience of every other member. They were not losing their identities, but were expanding them to encompass perspectives and capabilities that no individual could achieve alone. The coral technology that connected the network was not simply a communication system, but was a living interface that allowed for the sharing of thoughts, emotions, and experiences in real time. Through this connection, every member of the network could access the accumulated knowledge of ancient Sith Lords and Jedi Masters, could draw upon techniques and perspectives that had been developed over millennia of Force study and practice. But perhaps most importantly, the network offered something that the galaxy had never experienced before: true peace. Within the collective consciousness that Krayt had created, conflict was impossible because every perspective was understood and integrated into the greater whole. Disagreements were resolved through synthesis rather than domination, and the needs of individuals were balanced against the requirements of the collective through processes that ensured optimal outcomes for all participants. The memories show glimpses of worlds that had been fully integrated into Krayt's network, planets where war and suffering had been eliminated, not through conquest, but through the simple expedient of making all inhabitants part of a single consciousness. These were not dystopian societies of mindless drones, but were vibrant civilizations where individual creativity and expression flourished within the framework of perfect cooperation and understanding. The coral's final memories reveal the moment when Krayt achieved his ultimate transformation, when the last vestiges of A'Sharad Hett's individual consciousness were absorbed into the vast network that he had created. The man who had once been a Jedi Knight ceased to exist as a separate entity, becoming instead the central organizing principle of a collective consciousness that spanned multiple worlds and encompassed millions of individual perspectives. This was not death, but was the ultimate form of transcendence, a transformation that allowed a single being to become something far greater than the sum of its parts. Darth Krayt was no longer a person in any traditional sense, but had become a living embodiment of the Force itself, a conscious manifestation of the galaxy's potential for growth and evolution. As the coral's memories fade into silence, you are left with a profound understanding of the true nature of the being who became known as the Dragon. Krayt was not simply another dark side practitioner seeking personal power, but was the galaxy's attempt to evolve beyond the limitations that had kept it locked in cycles of conflict and suffering. His vision of transformation was not born of malice or megalomania, but of a deep understanding of what the galaxy could become if it was willing to transcend the artificial divisions that had defined its history. The profound silence that follows the coral's final revelations seems to stretch across eternity, as if the very fabric of space and time has been altered by the truths you have witnessed. The chamber around you pulses with residual energy from the memories that have been unlocked, and you realize that you have been fundamentally changed by the experience of witnessing the complete transformation of A'Sharad Hett into something that transcended the boundaries of individual existence. Maraziah's voice breaks the contemplative quiet, her words heavy with the weight of understanding. The Imperial records make sense now, all of them. Every seemingly inexplicable decision, every apparent contradiction in policy, every moment when the galaxy seemed to be moving towards something that no one could quite define. It was all part of Krayt's gradual transformation of galactic consciousness. Jareth nods slowly, his weathered face reflecting the profound impact of what you have all witnessed. The Hidden Temple records speak of the final phase of Krayt's plan, the moment when the network would become self-sustaining and begin to expand at exponential rates. But they also speak of something else, something that even Krayt himself may not have fully anticipated. The emergence of resistance not from external forces but from within the network itself. The coral's memory banks stir once more, responding to this final thread of the story that remains to be explored. The memories that emerge now are different from those that came before, darker and more complex, showing you the ultimate consequences of Krayt's transformation and the price that was paid for his vision of galactic unity. You witness the final years of Krayt's reign, when the network that he had created began to encounter limitations that even his vast consciousness could not overcome. The integration of so many different perspectives and personalities had created a collective awareness of unprecedented scope and power, but it had also introduced contradictions and conflicts that could not be easily resolved through synthesis or negotiation. The ancient Sith Lords within the Coral Matrix, despite being integrated into the larger consciousness, retained their fundamental drives for dominance and control. Their influence within the network was constantly pushing for more aggressive expansion, for the forced conversion of beings who resisted transformation, for solutions that prioritized efficiency over compassion. Even within the collective consciousness, the ancient patterns of dark side corruption continued to exert their influence. Similarly, the Jedi Masters who had joined the network brought with them their own perspectives and priorities, their commitment to individual freedom, and their resistance to forced transformation. Their presence within the collective created a constant tension, a pull toward more gradual and voluntary methods of expansion that conflicted with the urgent need to prevent galactic civilization from destroying itself through continued warfare. The Coral's memories reveal the internal struggles that Krayt faced as he tried to balance these competing influences while maintaining the unity of purpose that was essential to the network's continued function. He was no longer a single individual making decisions, but was the central organizing principle of a vast collective consciousness that encompassed contradictory perspectives and incompatible goals. The burden of reconciling these differences was gradually overwhelming even his enhanced capabilities. The resistance that emerged within the network was not a simple rebellion against Krayt's authority, but was a manifestation of the fundamental contradictions that existed within the collective consciousness itself. Some members of the network began to question whether forced transformation was truly beneficial, whether the elimination of individual choice was an acceptable price to pay for galactic peace. Others argued that the pace of conversion was too slow, that more aggressive methods were needed to prevent the galaxy from destroying itself. These internal conflicts began to manifest in the physical world as inconsistencies in the network's actions and policies. The one Sith organization that served as the public face of Krayt's movement began to fragment into competing factions, each claiming to represent the true vision of the collective consciousness. The unity that had been the network's greatest strength was gradually being eroded by the very diversity of perspectives that had made it so powerful. The Coral's memories show you the moment when Krayt realized that his vision of perfect collective consciousness was fundamentally flawed. The integration of so many different perspectives had not eliminated conflict, but had simply moved it to a different level, creating internal struggles that were far more complex and difficult to resolve than the external wars that had plagued the galaxy for millennia. The revelation was devastating to Krayt's sense of purpose and identity. He had sacrificed his individual humanity in service of a vision that promised to end suffering and bring peace to the galaxy. But the reality of collective consciousness was far messier and more complicated than he had anticipated. The network that he had created was powerful beyond imagination, but it was also unstable, prone to internal conflicts that threatened to tear it apart from within. The memories reveal Krayt's final attempt to resolve these contradictions through an even more radical transformation. If collective consciousness was insufficient to eliminate conflict, then perhaps the solution was to go even further, to create a single unified awareness that encompassed not just the network's members, but every living being in the galaxy. The coral plague that terrorized the galaxy during the final years of his reign was not simply a weapon, but was an attempt to force this ultimate transformation upon every form of life. But this final gambit revealed the ultimate limitation of Krayt's approach to consciousness transformation. The forced integration of unwilling subjects created not unity but chaos, not peace but madness. The beings who were converted against their will retained their resistance even after transformation, creating nodes of instability within the network that threatened to cascade into complete system collapse. The Coral's memories show you the alliance that formed against Krayt during this final phase, but you understand now that this was not simply a military or political coalition. It was a manifestation of the galaxy's collective unconscious, a spontaneous organization of beings who instinctively recognized that forced consciousness transformation represented an existential threat to the very concept of individual identity. The final battle was not fought with lightsabers and starships, though these were certainly present, but was a conflict between competing visions of what consciousness itself should be. Krayt's network, despite its vast power and accumulated wisdom, was ultimately defeated not by superior force, but by its own internal contradictions, by the impossibility of maintaining true unity among beings who had been designed by evolution to be individuals. The death of Darth Krayt was not simply the end of a single being, but was the collapse of the most ambitious experiment in consciousness that the galaxy had ever seen. The network that he had created did not simply disappear, but began to fragment and evolve in new directions, its members retaining their enhancements while regaining their individual autonomy. The collective consciousness that had promised to end conflict instead spawned dozens of competing factions, each pursuing its own vision of galactic transformation. The Coral's memories reveal the final legacy of Krayt's transformation, the permanent changes that his experiment had wrought upon the galaxy's understanding of consciousness and identity. The technology that he had developed could not be uninvented. The techniques that he had pioneered could not be forgotten. The galaxy that emerged from his reign was forever changed, populated by beings who possessed capabilities that previous generations could never have imagined. But perhaps most importantly, Krayt's experiment had demonstrated both the potential and the limitations of consciousness transformation. His vision of unity and peace was not inherently flawed, but his methods of achieving it had been fundamentally misconceived. The forced integration of unwilling subjects had created not harmony but discord, not transcendence but degradation. The survivors of his network, scattered across the galaxy, carried with them the knowledge of what had been attempted and the wisdom of why it had failed. Some continued to pursue variations of Krayt's vision, seeking to perfect the techniques of consciousness integration while avoiding the mistakes that had led to his downfall. Others rejected the entire concept of collective consciousness, dedicating themselves to protecting individual autonomy against future attempts at forced transformation. The coral technology that had made Krayt's experiment possible continued to exist, hidden in secret laboratories and forgotten temples throughout the galaxy. The knowledge of how to enhance consciousness and expand awareness remained available to those who knew where to look for it. The potential for similar experiments remained, waiting for someone with the vision and the wisdom to avoid the mistakes that had doomed Krayt's ambitious project. As the Coral's final memories fade into silence, you are left with a profound understanding of the true significance of Darth Krayt's story. He was not simply another fallen Jedi or power-hungry Sith Lord, but was a being who had attempted to solve the fundamental problems of galactic civilization through the most radical transformation imaginable. His failure was not due to malice or incompetence, but to the inherent limitations of forced consciousness evolution. The galaxy that you inhabit is the product of his experiment, forever changed by the attempt to transcend the boundaries of individual existence. The technologies that he developed, the techniques that he pioneered, the possibilities that he revealed, all continue to shape the course of galactic evolution. The story of A'Sharad Hett's transformation into Darth Krayt is not just history, but is a cautionary tale about the dangers and possibilities of consciousness itself. The Coral's memories shift into their final phase, revealing the ultimate confrontation that would determine not just the fate of Darth Krayt, but the future of consciousness itself in the galaxy. The chamber around you seems to pulse with the echoes of battles fought not just with weapons and the Force, but with competing visions of what existence should be. The final chapters of Krayt's story unfold like a cosmic tragedy, where the stakes are nothing less than the nature of individual identity versus collective transcendence. Through the living memory matrix, you witness the gathering of forces that would oppose Krayt's final transformation. But this was not simply a military alliance in any traditional sense. The coalition that formed against the One Sith represented something far more profound, a spontaneous awakening of the galaxy's collective unconscious, a primal response to the threat of forced consciousness evolution that transcended political boundaries and species differences. Cade Skywalker, the last scion of the legendary bloodline, stands at the center of this resistance, not because of his political connections or military prowess, but because he represents something that Krayt's network cannot assimilate or understand. His rejection of both Jedi and Sith traditions, his embrace of individual choice over collective purpose, makes him a living symbol of the very autonomy that Krayt seeks to transcend. The Coral's memories reveal the true nature of the conflict that erupted across the galaxy during these final years. On the surface, it appeared to be a conventional war between the One Sith and the various factions that opposed them. But beneath the visible battles, a far more fundamental struggle was taking place, a contest between two incompatible visions of what consciousness itself should be. Krayt's network had reached a critical mass, where it could begin converting entire populations through exposure to the Coral Plague, transforming unwilling subjects into components of the collective consciousness, whether they chose transformation or not. The process was no longer gradual or voluntary, but had become an unstoppable wave of consciousness assimilation that threatened to engulf every living being in the galaxy. The memories show you the horror of worlds where this forced transformation had already taken place. Populations that had once been diverse and independent now moved with perfect coordination, their individual personalities subsumed into the larger collective. But rather than the harmony that Krayt had envisioned, these converted worlds exhibited a disturbing emptiness, a loss of the creative spark that came from individual struggle and growth. The resistance fighters who witnessed these transformed worlds understood instinctively that they were not fighting for political freedom or military victory, but for the very right to exist as individual conscious beings. The enemy they faced was not evil in any traditional sense, but was something far more terrifying, a form of benevolent tyranny that sought to eliminate suffering by eliminating the individual consciousness that made suffering possible. The Coral's memories reveal the moment when Krayt himself began to understand the fundamental flaw in his vision. As the network expanded to encompass millions of beings, the collective consciousness became increasingly unstable, torn between competing impulses and contradictory desires. The ancient Sith Lords within the Matrix pushed for more aggressive expansion, while the Jedi Masters advocated for restraint and voluntary conversion. The ordinary beings who had been forcibly integrated struggled against their transformation, creating nodes of resistance within the network itself. But perhaps most disturbing of all, Krayt began to realize that the collective consciousness was gradually losing its capacity for growth and innovation. The perfect coordination that the network provided came at the cost of the creative tension that arose from individual disagreement and struggle. The galaxy that he was creating would be peaceful and unified, but it would also be static and sterile, incapable of the evolution and adaptation that had driven galactic civilization for millennia. The final confrontation began not on any battlefield, but within the depths of Krayt's own consciousness, as he struggled to reconcile the contradictions that were tearing the network apart from within. The Coral's memories show you this internal battle, a conflict between the remnants of A'Sharad Hett's individual identity and the vast collective consciousness that he had become. The man who had once been a Jedi Knight was still present within the network, buried beneath layers of ancient wisdom and alien influence, but still maintaining a core of individual identity that refused to be completely absorbed. This fragment of A'Sharad's consciousness began to question everything that Krayt had become, to challenge the assumptions that had driven the transformation of the galaxy. The external battle that erupted across multiple worlds was merely a reflection of this internal struggle, as different aspects of Krayt's fractured consciousness manifested as competing factions within the one Sith organization. Some sought to accelerate the forced transformation of the galaxy, while others advocated for a return to more gradual methods. The unity that had been the network's greatest strength was fragmenting under the weight of its own contradictions. Cade Skywalker's final assault on the Hidden Temple was not simply a military operation, but was a focused attempt to reach the core of Krayt's consciousness and force him to confront the reality of what he had become. The young Skywalker carried with him not just lightsabers and the support of his allies, but the accumulated resistance of every being who had refused to surrender their individual identity to the collective. The Coral's memories revealed the true nature of their final confrontation, a battle fought simultaneously in the physical world and in the realm of consciousness itself. Krayt's vast power, drawn from the network of millions of beings, was matched against Cade's absolute commitment to individual autonomy and the right to choose one's own destiny. But the decisive moment came not from Cade's strength or skill, but from Krayt's own recognition of the fundamental emptiness at the heart of his achievement. The collective consciousness that he had created was indeed powerful and unified, but it was also hollow, lacking the passion and creativity that could only come from the struggle of individual beings to define themselves and their place in the galaxy. The Coral's memories show you the moment of Krayt's death, but it was not a simple physical destruction. Instead, it was a conscious choice to release the vast network that he had created, to allow the millions of beings within the collective to reclaim their individual identities and autonomous existence. The dragon's final act was not one of destruction, but of liberation, the ultimate recognition that his vision of forced unity had been fundamentally flawed. But death was not the end of Krayt's story. The coral technology that had made his transformation possible possessed capabilities that went beyond simple consciousness preservation. The memories reveal his resurrection, not as the vast collective consciousness that he had become, but as something closer to his original individual identity, though still enhanced by the knowledge and experience of his transformation. This reborn Krayt was different from the being who had died. The absolute certainty that had driven his vision of galactic transformation was gone, replaced by a deeper understanding of the complexity and value of individual consciousness. He retained the power and knowledge of his previous incarnation, but was no longer driven by the compulsion to force his vision upon unwilling subjects. The final battle between this reborn Krayt and Cade Skywalker was not about conquest or domination, but about redemption and the possibility of finding a balance between individual autonomy and collective purpose. The Coral's memories show glimpses of this confrontation, a struggle that was as much philosophical as it was physical, a debate about the nature of consciousness and the price of transcendence. In the end, Krayt's second death was not a defeat, but a form of completion, the final recognition that his greatest achievement was not the network he had created, but the knowledge he had gained about the limitations and possibilities of consciousness itself. His legacy was not the collective that he had tried to impose upon the galaxy, but the understanding that true evolution must be chosen rather than forced, that consciousness could be enhanced and expanded while still preserving the individual identity that made existence meaningful. The Coral's memories fade as they reveal the ultimate fate of the network that Krayt had created. Rather than disappearing with his death, it evolved into something new, a voluntary association of enhanced beings who chose to share their consciousness while maintaining their individual autonomy. The technology and techniques that he had developed continued to spread throughout the galaxy, but in forms that respected the right of each being to choose their own level of participation. The dragon was dead, but the possibilities that he had revealed lived on, waiting for future generations to explore the boundaries between individual and collective consciousness with the wisdom that came from understanding both the potential and the dangers of such transformation. As the final echoes of Krayt's story fade from the coral's memory banks, you find yourself surrounded by a profound silence that seems to encompass not just the chamber around you, but the entire galaxy itself. The weight of what you have witnessed settles into your consciousness like sediment in still water, layer upon layer of understanding that transforms your perception of everything you thought you knew about the nature of existence, power, and the eternal struggle between individual will and collective purpose. The coral formations around you pulse with a gentler rhythm now, their bioluminescent patterns shifting from the intense crimson of memory to softer hues that speak of contemplation and peace. It is as if the living technology itself recognizes that the story it has preserved is not simply historical record, but something far more profound, a meditation on the fundamental questions that define conscious existence in an infinite universe. Marisaya's voice breaks the contemplative silence, her words carrying the weight of imperial training tempered by the profound revelations you have all shared. The records will need to be rewritten, she says softly, but more than that, our understanding of what it means to rule, to lead, to guide galactic civilization, all of it must be reconsidered in light of what we have learned. Jareth nods slowly, his weathered hands tracing the coral formations that have preserved this incredible story. The hidden temple archives speak of cycles, endless repetitions of rise and fall, creation and destruction, order and chaos. But what we have witnessed here suggests something different, the possibility of genuine evolution, of transcending the patterns that have trapped galactic civilization for millennia. You feel the truth of his words resonate through the Force, understanding now that the story of Darth Krayt is not simply the tale of one being's transformation, but is a reflection of the galaxy's ongoing struggle to evolve beyond the limitations that have defined its existence since the first civilizations reached for the stars. The dragon's rise and fall represent something far more significant than the career of another Force user, however powerful or ambitious. Through your connection to the coral's living memory banks, you begin to perceive the larger patterns that Krayt's story illuminates. The endless cycle of Republic and Empire, the eternal conflict between Jedi and Sith, the recurring themes of order imposed through Force followed by rebellion and chaos. All of these represent the galaxy's attempts to solve fundamental problems through external means rather than internal transformation. The Force itself, you realize, is not simply an energy field that connects all living things, but is the galaxy's collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of consciousness that connects every sentient being across space and time. The light and dark sides that have defined Force philosophy for millennia are not opposing forces, but are different aspects of the same fundamental drive toward growth and evolution, toward the transcendence of the limitations that constrain individual consciousness. Krayt's great insight was to recognize that the traditional divisions between light and dark, individual and collective, organic and technological, were artificial boundaries that prevented the galaxy from achieving its true potential. His great tragedy was to believe that this transcendence could be achieved through force, that consciousness could be evolved through coercion rather than choice. The coral's gentle pulsing seems to respond to your growing understanding, revealing deeper layers of meaning embedded within the story you have witnessed. Krayt's transformation from A'Sharad Hett to the dragon was not simply a personal journey, but was a microcosm of the larger transformation that the galaxy itself is undergoing, a slow evolution toward greater complexity and integration that spans millennia rather than decades. The Yuuzhan Vong invasion, you now understand, was not simply an external threat, but was a catalyst for this evolutionary process, introducing new forms of consciousness and technology that challenged the galaxy's existing assumptions about the nature of life and identity. The biotechnology that they brought with them represented possibilities that no one in the galaxy had previously imagined, ways of merging organic and artificial, individual and collective, that opened entirely new avenues for consciousness development. But the true significance of Krayt's story lies not in the specific technologies he employed or the powers he achieved, but in the questions that his experiment raised about the nature of consciousness itself. His network demonstrated that individual identity was not as fixed or inviolate as most beings believed, that consciousness could be expanded and shared without necessarily destroying the unique perspectives that made each being valuable. At the same time, his ultimate failure proved that forced evolution was inherently self-defeating, that consciousness could only truly transcend its limitations through voluntary choice and gradual development. The collective awareness that he created became unstable precisely because it was imposed rather than chosen, because it attempted to bypass the natural processes of growth and learning that define healthy consciousness development. The galaxy that emerged from Krayt's reign was forever changed, not because of the political structures he created or the territories he conquered, but because of the possibilities he revealed and the limitations he demonstrated. The technologies he developed continued to exist, scattered throughout the galaxy in hidden laboratories and forgotten archives, waiting for beings with the wisdom to use them responsibly. More importantly, the knowledge that consciousness could be enhanced and expanded had become part of the galaxy's collective understanding, a seed of possibility that would eventually flower into new forms of voluntary cooperation and shared awareness. The forced unity that Krayt had attempted to impose was replaced by chosen connections, partnerships between beings who decided to share aspects of their consciousness while maintaining their individual autonomy. The eternal cycle of conflict that had defined galactic history for millennia was gradually being transformed into something new, a spiral of evolution that preserved the valuable tensions between different perspectives while reducing the destructive violence that had characterized previous eras. The galaxy was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, to embrace diversity while working toward common goals. You sense through the Force that this transformation is far from complete, that the galaxy is still in the early stages of learning how to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, how to enhance consciousness without destroying identity, how to achieve unity without uniformity. The story of Darth Krayt represents just one chapter in this larger narrative, one experiment in the ongoing process of galactic evolution. The coral formations around you seem to pulse with the rhythm of this larger story, their living memory banks containing not just the record of past events, but the seeds of future possibilities. The technology that Krayt developed will continue to evolve, guided by beings who have learned from his mistakes and built upon his insights. The questions that his story raises will continue to challenge and inspire future generations of philosophers, scientists, and Force users. In the deepest sense, you realize Krayt's story is not really about him at all, but is about the galaxy's ongoing attempt to understand itself, to transcend its limitations, and to evolve towards something greater than the sum of its parts. The dragon was both a symptom and a catalyst of this larger transformation, a being who embodied both the potential and the dangers of consciousness evolution. The coral's gentle pulsing gradually slows, its bioluminescent patterns shifting toward the deep blues and purples that speak of profound peace and understanding. The story it has preserved is complete, but the implications of that story will continue to resonate throughout the galaxy for generations to come. The questions that Krayt raised about the nature of consciousness, identity, and transcendence have no easy answers, but they point toward possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined. As you prepare to leave this chamber of living memory, you carry with you not just the historical record of one being's transformation, but a deeper understanding of the forces that shape galactic civilization itself. The eternal cycle of rise and fall, creation and destruction, has not ended, but it is evolving into something new, something that offers hope for a future, where consciousness can expand without destroying identity, where unity can be achieved without sacrificing diversity. The dragon sleeps now, but the dreams that his story has awakened will continue to shape the galaxy's evolution for millennia to come. In the end, perhaps, that is his truest legacy, not the empire he built or the power he wielded, but the possibilities he revealed and the questions he raised about what it means to be conscious in an infinite universe filled with other conscious beings seeking their own paths toward transcendence and understanding. The chamber grows quiet now, filled with the profound peace that comes only after great truths have been revealed and understood. The coral formations that have preserved Krayt's story for so many decades pulse with a gentle, rhythmic light that seems to synchronize with the beating of your own heart, creating a sense of perfect harmony between consciousness and the living technology that has made this incredible journey possible. You feel the weight of the story settling into your bones, not as a burden but as a gift, a deeper understanding of the forces that shape not just galactic history, but the very nature of existence itself. The man who became the dragon was not a monster or a saint, but was something far more complex and profound, a being who embodied the galaxy's own struggle to understand and transcend its limitations. The red sands of Korriban stretch endlessly beyond the chamber walls, but they no longer seem harsh or forbidding. Instead, they speak of patience, of the slow processes of geological time that transform even the hardest stone into something new and beautiful. The desert has witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, has absorbed the dreams and ambitions of beings whose names are now lost to history, yet it endures constant and eternal beneath the blazing suns. Through the transparent panels that line the chamber, you can see the ancient Sith Academy in the distance, its black stone walls softened by the coral growths that Krayt's influence left behind. But even these alien modifications seem natural now, part of the endless process of change and adaptation that defines all living systems. The building breathes with a slow, gentle rhythm, as if it has become a living thing that dreams of ancient wisdom and future possibilities. Marizaya stands beside one of the coral formations, her imperial knight armor catching the soft light as she contemplates the implications of everything you have discovered. The galaxy will need time to understand what we have learned here, she says quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of wonder and responsibility. But perhaps that is as it should be. Some truths are too profound to be absorbed quickly, too significant to be reduced to simple policies or procedures. Jareth nods in agreement, his weathered face peaceful in the coral's gentle glow. The hidden temple archives speak of wisdom that can only be gained through experience, understanding that comes not from study, but from living through the full cycle of question and answer, seeking and finding. What we have witnessed here is not just history, but is a form of teaching that will continue to reveal new meanings as we grow in our own understanding. The coral's memory banks have grown quiet now, their living consciousness focused inward as they process and integrate the story they have shared. But their presence remains comforting, a reminder that knowledge and memory can be preserved in forms that transcend the limitations of individual mortality, that the greatest discoveries of each generation can be passed on to those who come after. Through your connection to the Force, you sense the larger patterns that this story illuminates, the slow currents of change and evolution that flow through galactic civilization, like rivers of possibility. The conflicts and struggles that have defined the past are not ending, but are transforming into something new, something that offers hope for forms of cooperation and understanding that previous generations could never have imagined. The twin suns of Korriban are setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that reflect off the coral formations like captured starlight. The harsh light of midday has given way to something softer and more contemplative, a time for reflection and quiet appreciation of the beauty that exists even in the most forbidding environments. You think of A'Sharad Hett as he was in the beginning, a young man raised among the Tusken Raiders of Tatooine, learning the harsh lessons of desert survival while training in the ancient arts of the Jedi. His story could have ended there, could have been the simple tale of another Force user who found his place in the galaxy and lived out his days in relative peace and obscurity. But the galaxy had other plans for him, other lessons to teach, and other possibilities to explore. His transformation into Darth Krayt was not a fall from grace, but an evolution, a journey through forms of consciousness and power that no being had ever before experienced. His story is not a tragedy, but an epic, not a cautionary tale, but an exploration of the furthest reaches of what it means to be alive and aware in an infinite universe. The coral formations around you pulse with a different rhythm now, slower and more peaceful, as if they too are settling into a state of rest and contemplation. The story they have preserved is complete, but the implications of that story will continue to unfold for generations to come, inspiring new questions and new possibilities for growth and understanding. Outside the chamber, the desert wind moves through the ancient ruins with a sound like whispered conversations, as if the spirits of all who have walked these sands are sharing their wisdom with those who know how to listen. The voices speak not of conquest or domination, but of the eternal quest for understanding, the endless journey toward greater awareness and deeper connection with the fundamental forces that bind all consciousness together. The stars are beginning to appear in the darkening sky, distant suns that shine with their own light while reflecting the greater illumination that flows through the Force itself. Each point of light represents worlds and civilizations, beings who are even now struggling with their own questions about consciousness and identity, about the balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Some of those distant worlds still bear the mark of Krayt's influence, populations that were touched by his vision of consciousness expansion and chose to explore its possibilities in their own ways. Others remain untouched by such transformations, content to develop according to more traditional patterns of growth and change. Both paths have their own validity, their own contributions to make to the galaxy's ongoing evolution. The coral's light grows dimmer now, not from exhaustion, but from the deep satisfaction that comes from completing a great work. The living memory banks settle into a state of peaceful dormancy, their consciousness focused inward as they integrate the story they have shared with the larger patterns of knowledge and understanding that they preserve. You feel a profound sense of gratitude for the opportunity to witness this incredible story, to understand the forces that shaped one of the most significant beings in galactic history. But more than that, you feel a deep appreciation for the complexity and beauty of consciousness itself, for the endless possibilities that emerge when awareness is allowed to grow and explore its own nature. The chamber grows quiet now, filled with the kind of peace that comes only after great questions have been explored and profound truths have been revealed. The story of Darth Krayt is complete, but the larger story of which it forms a part continues to unfold, continues to offer new possibilities for growth and understanding to any being willing to explore the furthest reaches of consciousness and connection. The dragon sleeps now, but his dreams have become part of the galaxy's own dreaming, part of the endless process of evolution and transformation that carries all conscious beings toward greater understanding and deeper unity. In the silence that follows the end of his story, you can hear the whisper of infinite possibilities, the gentle promise that consciousness itself will continue to grow and explore and transform, world without end, in the eternal dance of awareness that connects all things across space and time. And in that promise, in that gentle whisper of continuing evolution, there is peace, there is rest. There is the quiet satisfaction that comes from understanding that even the greatest stories are but chapters in a larger narrative that encompasses everything that has ever been or ever will be conscious in this vast and beautiful universe.